Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, politicians, business people, scientists and activists have gathered in Glasgow for COP26 this week, all with an aim to keep the Earth's temperature well below 2 degrees. Our business correspondent Simon Pusey will be updating us on the main headlines that came out of week one. Greg Swenson, a founding senior partner at investment firm Brigg McAdam, will also be joining me in the studio for an American perspective of President Joe Biden's big climate finance pledges. And staying with climate, John Keane, the CEO of charity Solar Aid, will be joining me from Lusaka, Zambia, to explain how his work in distributing solar lights to families living without electricity on the continent can reduce Africa's CO2 emissions by 1.1 tonnes. Then later, Muhammad Ali, the co-organiser of Applied Machine Learning Days Africa, will be joining me from Tunis in Tunisia to discuss the ways artificial intelligence can minimise medium to large-sized companies' environmental footprint. But first, let's start the show with business news from here in the UK, where fishing wars are ongoing. In the latest turn, French President Emmanuel Macron has agreed to stall sanctions against British trade in order to allow talks in the post-Brexit fishing dispute to continue. France is demanding more permits to fish in British waters under the UK-EU trade deal and had previously threatened to bar British fishing boats from its ports and increase checks on UK exports from the 2nd of November. The diplomatic row over fishing, a very small sector of UK economy, threatened to overshadow the G20 talks, which took place over the weekend, and the COP26 summit. In other British business news, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said there's a long way to go in the fight to curb climate change, adding that he remains cautiously optimistic. More than 100 global leaders have pledged to halt and reverse deforestation by the end of the decade, underpinned by $19 billion in public and private funds. Nations have also agreed to cut emissions of methane. Despite some notable absences, politicians, business people, scientists and activists have urged to accelerate the transition to net zero, with an aim to keep the Earth's temperature well below 2 degrees.
The children who will judge us are children not yet born, and their children. And we are now coming centre stage before a vast and uncountable audience of posterity, and we mustn't fluff our lines or miss our cue, because if we fail, they will not forgive us. They will know that Glasgow was the historic turning point when history failed to turn. They will judge us with bitterness and with a resentment that eclipses any of the climate activists of today. And they will be right. COP26 will not and cannot be the end of the story on climate change.
Earlier, I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey for some week one analysis. Simon, unlike the Prime Minister in his usual boastful stance, he struck a more cautious tone, saying that he was cautiously optimistic about some of the ambitious pledges we heard in week one.
Yeah, well, I think the fact that sort of China and Russia, India are not all on board is something that no one's really going to be able to overlook, because they're such big emitters of CO2, and you really do need a collective effort if this is going to work. Obviously, we know Boris Johnson and this government like to be enthusiastic and optimistic, and this was the UK hosting, so he's never going to say that anything was negative really too hard. But I think there were moments really where people are a little bit disappointed. For example, when it comes to net zero, you know, most of the countries in the world have said 2050 as a date, but then China and Russia have said 2060 and India have said 2070. So, you know, no one's on board there. Then you've got this $100 billion going to developed countries, which was supposed to have arrived now. It's been pushed back to 2023, 3 years later than originally planned. So with all of these pledges from politicians, you look at Paris and you look at Copenhagen before that, the number of times they've actually followed through and it's actually happened. Words is one thing, as Greta Thunberg said, blah, blah, blah. You know, it's a lot of it is rhetoric and a lot of it is pandering to people back home and politicians trying to show that they're doing the right thing. But then you have successive governments that come in and they change the rules a little bit and things don't actually always work out. I think it was great in many aspects. In terms of the rhetoric, you had incredible speeches from the likes of David Attenborough, Prince Charles, Prince William. You know, Boris went up there and did his usual analogies where he's talking about football results and things like that. So, you know, I think from the extent of it putting climate change on the map, lots of people have been talking about this. It's been all over the news. Obviously, it's been hosted in the UK, so it's going to be. But I think what a lot of people are concerned about, and a lot of those protesters, including Greta Thunberg, even you had Leonardo DiCaprio there, will be worried about is whether this will actually be turned into action. So, you know, you've got deforestation, cutting down on methane. These are all big promises, but the huge industry needs to change. And it's one thing for the government to say this. It's a very other thing for all of those private businesses that currently rely on steel production, on coal, on gas, on oil, for them to change their ways. I think that's the key thing. And I think for governments to somehow be able to shift the economics of that in terms of green energy, that's the thing that will really, you know, people will be looking at over the next few years to see if we can reach, you know, net neutrality by 2050. And that's a very, very difficult task.
Staying with COP26, US President Joe Biden wants $3 billion a year of US climate finance to go toward helping vulnerable nations adapt to rising seas, droughts and other consequences of global warming. The ambitious pledge may be a dip in the ocean for the world's largest economy. However, Americans appear to be more sceptical about the climate threat than people living in Europe. To provide us with a domestic perspective, I was earlier joined in the studio by Greg Swenson, a founding senior partner at investment firm Brigg McAdam. Greg is also the chair of Republicans Overseas UK. Greg, it's always such a pleasure to have you on Channel's Business Global. Biden, your leader, he's left COP26 criticising world leaders such as Xi Jinping and Putin for not showing up, taking a completely different stance to Trump. How are those pledges and those sentiments being taken back home in America?
I don't think it's polling as well as it would here in Europe. You know, remember, there's a couple of moving parts. One is climate change as an issue polls around 35%. In other words, only 35% of Americans would view it as their biggest issue. I think that would be much higher here in Europe and in the UK. So it's just not an issue. The biggest issue, the only one that polls over 50, is the economy and inflation. So if you think about what he's doing at COP26 and trying to get through in Congress back in the US, you know, the climate programs and the Green New Deal, that's just not polling well with American voters. So I also think that, you know, versus Trump, who sort of led with energy independence and making the U.S. the biggest or the number one energy producer in the world, you know, that was a good moment for Trump. It doesn't mean he was against solar and wind, and you know
he pulled out of Paris.
He did, but also, you know, that was not surprising, and I think even you know, I think you'll see a lot of right-leaning politicians that would have done the same thing. But you know, there is some confidence that comes from energy leadership, and then you saw this humiliation with Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, as well as Biden begging Putin, of all people, to pump more natural gas and OPEC to pump more oil. So, you know, there's some conflicting signals, and it's not polling very well in the U.S. So it's not. I'm not surprised that there's not a lot of support for his programs.
What about the $3 billion he wants every year for climate finance, and is he going to get it?
I think he will, because given the spending that's gone on in the last 18 months since the pandemic, as well as what he's proposing. You know, that's a rounding error, $3 billion a year. You know, he's talking about $550 billion for green companies, which is basically corporate welfare. I'm all for the cause, but I'm not sure that corporate welfare is the right way to address it. So I think $3 billion a year for Africa or other emerging markets, fantastic idea. I think that would easily pass, because it's not really that big of a number.
it isn't. Let's talk about one of your favourite topics, Greg. The Republicans are doing amazing this week. There was a resounding victory in the Virginia gubernatorial. What are the consequences of this?
Well, I think the consequences are huge, and it's interesting to point out that this has happened before. So while it is major news, this is a year after Biden won Virginia by 10 points. I'm not sure what he won New Jersey by, but it was much bigger margin because New Jersey is a much more Democratic-leaning state. So this is really big news. I think it's a really big indicator for the midterms next year, but it's always been that way. So after some transformative, or at least an attempt at transformative change by Bill Clinton in '93, his first year, as well as Barack Obama in 2009, his first year, in both cases, the following year, the election swung to Republicans, both in New Jersey, which is because I think there's a tendency for Democratic leaders to overstep, to overdo it with their policy proposals. So, and Biden's stepping into the same trap. Obama really ran as an agent of change, so maybe he had a little more license to do that. And he also was an extremely talented politician and a solid guy. Biden doesn't have those gifts, but he also campaigned as a moderate. So I think what the people are seeing is, okay, you promised to be a moderate and be a unifier, and yet you're coming in with the most transformative policy proposals that we've seen since Reagan, LBJ, and FDR. At least President Obama had more of a mandate. He won quite comfortably in 2008. He also had the House and the Senate. FDR, LBJ, Reagan, they all won with massive landslide victories, but also bringing along 30, 40, 50 congressional seats, 12 Senate seats in the case of FDR and Reagan. And yet Biden lost 13 seats in the House and only picked up 3 seats in the Senate. So, this isn't a president with a great mandate. So this wasn't a big surprise historically, although I am still surprised that, with the idea that, he won the state by 10 points.
Pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I am. I'm pleasantly surprised. I think it's a good indicator for the midterms, that's for sure. But I look back at, '94 when Christine Todd Whitman won in New Jersey. I can't remember the Republican that won in Virginia at the time, but the same thing happened in '93 and '09. And the midterms were hugely favorable for Republicans in '94 and 2010, what President Obama called the shellacking, because, his policies were just rejected by the electorate. And I think that's going to happen again.
I want to focus a little bit about Biden. We saw him coming off Air Force One, obviously deflated after that defeat in Virginia, but tired too, really tired.
I think he's having a tough time. There's some cognitive issues there, I think his cognitive...
Allegedly.
Yeah, and we don't really know that, but I think it's getting harder and harder for his inner circle to protect him. It's getting harder for the press to protect him, which they've always done, because he does have these challenges. And it's not funny. I mean, the steps on the, going up to Air Force One and when he slipped and fell a few times, you hate to see that. It reminds me of Gerald Ford in the '70s. But, so you hate to see it. It's funny sometimes, but I think that we're learning that this is very uncomfortable for him. That's why they keep him on a very tight schedule. You don't really see much of President Biden in the Oval Office, in the White House. He comes down for a few hours a day. They put some makeup on him, put some powder in his hair. It's not a feeling of confidence that Americans are getting from the president.
But for those who weren't that confident in him, we were promised Kamala Harris. We've not seen much of her, Greg. Where is she?
Yeah, I think she had a couple of early stumbles, starting with, her alleged responsibility for the border crisis. And it just didn't poll well after she sidestepped the issue a few times, went down to Latin America to try to fix the root causes. Those were her words, not mine. So I think it's been a very difficult term for her, and she's not polling well, so the handlers are actually keeping her out of the way as well. So we don't really know who's running the show. There's all kinds of speculation about it, but it's definitely not President Biden, and as it turns out, it's not Vice President Harris either.
Thank you.
Great to be
Greg
here,
Swenson.
Juliana.
Always a pleasure seeing you, this time in the studio. Thanks
Great
so
to
much
be here
for joining
live.
me on the show. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, John Keane, the CEO of charity Solar Aid, will be joining me from Lusaka, Zambia, to explain how his work in distributing solar light to families living without electricity can reduce Africa's CO2 emissions by 1.1 tonnes. And Mohammed Ali, the co-organiser of Applied Machine Learning Days Africa, will be joining me from Tunis in Tunisia to discuss the ways artificial intelligence can minimise medium to large-size companies' environmental footprints. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a few minutes, I'll be speaking with John Keane, the CEO of charity Solar Aid, and Mohammed Ali, the co-organiser of Applied Machine Learning Days Africa. But before then, here's some company news for you. The American chief executive of Barclays, Jes Staley, resigned following an investigation by British regulators into his relationship with disgraced Jeffrey Epstein. Staley was Epstein's private banker when he worked at investment bank JP Morgan. The UK's financial watchdog and the Bank of England have been investigating Staley's relationship with Epstein, and the findings are due next month. A draft was sent to Staley last Friday. It is thought that his decision to resign was made after he read the conclusions. The Barclays board said it's disappointed at the outcome. Staley will get a £2.5 million payoff and other benefits for a year. Barclays' share price was trading down 2.5% following the announcement. Apple has cut back production of iPad tablets to allocate more components to the new iPhone 13. According to various media reports, over the past 2 months, iPad production has been down 50%, a direct effect of shifting chips to the new flagship handset. Last week, CEO Tim Cook said supply chain issues have so far cost Apple $6 billion in the fourth fiscal quarter of 2021, adding that ongoing issues are anticipated to have an even larger impact in the coming quarter. Last year, Apple also borrowed components from its tablet line to build iPhone 12s as the COVID-19 pandemic hit supply chains across the world. China's single-day shopping gala saw booming sales during its opening day on Monday. In the opening hour of trading, the turnover of more than 2,600 brands exceeded that of the entire day last year. The Double 11 shopping gala was a trend started by Alibaba's e-commerce platform in 2008. It has since become China's biggest online shopping event. Now to our next topic. The charity Solar Aid have embarked upon a new campaign, Darkness is Deadly, which aims to raise awareness about families living without electricity on the continent and the charity's attempts to tackle it, all while protecting the environment through utilising sustainable energy sources. The CEO of Solar Aid is based in Lusaka, Zambia, and he joins me now for more details about the project. John Keane, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. A really timely event because, of course, COP26 is taking place this week. Some really ambitious pledges. And for our viewers in Nigeria, they know all about being in the dark, unfortunately, because of the electricity issues we have there. Talk to me about Darkness is Deadly and why Solar Aid decided to launch this campaign.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Well, Solar Aid, it's a UK-based charity that fights poverty and climate change. And we do this by creating sustainable markets to solar lights. And we focus very much on Africa. And we work with schools, health clinics, entrepreneurs, particularly in areas without access to electricity. Now, we've launched this campaign because there's over 750 million people across the planet who live without access to electricity. We've done research in the UK. 82% of the people we spoke to had no idea. They just don't know. So I grew up with access to electricity. I'm 46 years old. But there's so many people living without it. And that leads to many, many problems. It hampers opportunity. It's dangerous if you're having to light a candle at night. And as you know, in Nigeria, even if you're living with access to electricity, there's many blackouts and then people are forced to light a candle. That causes all sorts of problems.
Absolutely. I can hear you're in the midst of a thunderstorm there. So if our viewers can hear some rattling, it's because that's going on. Thanks so much for still staying with us. Pretty simple question. But again, so many people are unaware of just how dangerous it can be. Why is it important that we focus on delivering sustainable energy to areas without access rather than just the electricity? Why should it be sustainable and solar?
Well, I mean, ultimately, it has to be a mix, but we very much focused on solar for many reasons. One is it's practical. If you've got areas without access to electricity, you can literally overnight get solar out to that area and enable people to turn the lights on. 3 out of 4 clinics across the continent have limited access to electricity. 1 out of 4 have no access to electricity. That can change literally overnight if you've got solar panels going on those roofs. So we're a very practical organization. We like to see immediate impact. We obviously, we believe there's an opportunity for many parts of Africa to leapfrog what many countries have done in the West. But ultimately, we're very practical, and we just know this can make a difference right now, tomorrow.
Absolutely. You seem to only be focusing on Zambia and Malawi at the moment. Before I let you go, John, tell us how successful it's been in those nations and why nowhere else?
Well, sure. Well, actually, yes, you're right. We're currently focusing on Malawi and Zambia because there's particularly acute problems with energy access in those countries. But obviously, it's not only in those countries. We have worked across Kenya, we've worked across Tanzania, we worked across Uganda, we've worked with partners in Senegal. But we're very much interested in addressing the energy access issue where it's most acute. So places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, less than 1% of people have access in rural areas. Nigeria, 77 million people are living without access in Nigeria alone. So we're very much focused on Malawi and Zambia right now, but obviously we want to expand to other countries with partners.
Absolutely. John King, thank you so much for all of the hard work that Solar Aid are doing. Please stay safe out of this thunderstorm, but do come back to Channel's Business Global because we certainly want to stay updated and find out exactly how the charity is progressing, not just in those nations, but across the continent. John King, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you very much.
Applied Machine Learning Days has hosted its first summit in Africa, gathering experts in the field from around the world to speak on the benefits of applying machine learning and artificial intelligence in innovation and sustainable development on the continent. Mohammed Ali, one of the co-organisers of the event, joins me now for some insights. Mohammed Ali, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Can you tell us about some of the highlights from Applied Machine Learning Days Africa?
Thank you. So there are 3 main highlights in Applied Machine Learning Days. We had our reach, our content, and finally our gender equality goal. So regarding our reach, we're present in 50 out of the 54 African countries. And Congo, Brazzaville, Libya, Zambia, we're coming for you next year, hopefully. Regarding our content, we had a rich and very diverse panel of speakers. We had African entrepreneurs who make a local impact in their ecosystem. We had scientists from Ivy Leagues, corporates like IBM, Google, Amazon, and we even have the Assistant Director General for UNESCO, Dr. Zaisi. And all those highlights are allowing us to do what we want to do today, which is mainly democratize access to machine learning at zero cost.
Tell us about how artificial intelligence and applied machine learning can help with economic opportunities on the continent.
Okay, so let's begin with one specificity in Nigeria. For example, Nigeria, according to one senator, it has 1 doctor to 40,000 patients. That's a lot of patients for one person. So artificial intelligence can apply to early detect diseases. And I'm not saying that machine learning is a substitute for doctors. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's that AI can intervene early in the healthcare process to optimize the time of the doctor. So the doctor will see patients who really need them, who are really sick. And this is what all AI is about, artificial intelligence. It's about intervening in like tracks like healthcare, agriculture, community, for example, to translate our old African languages and turn them into wisdom to help us grow as a continent. Today, Africa has like a unique opportunity to leverage new technology to drive competitiveness.
It's a major challenge, but thankfully the continent have got people like you, Mohammed, doing your best to making sure that we are speaking to the experts and you are kind of plumbing out all of the knowledge that we've got on the continent to make sure that we start adopting these systems in our small to medium-sized and large-scale businesses. Mohammed Ali, co-organiser of Applied Machine Learning Days Africa, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.